Hello, I'm Breach Burke, and what I want to do is talk a bit about the Azrael messages I have had since August. Now, I've made some videos. I think the last video I published was Azrael 8 or 9 on the channeling topic, and I haven't been able to do too many sessions where I just lay down or sit down and do a channeling. I have like a mini session every morning with Azrael when I'm before I start my morning coffee with Breege live stream usually, and oftentimes there are different messages that come in through the day. There are also messages that come in at night. So I feel like there's been a lot of things, and I've been sharing these in a rather scattered kind of a space. Some of them, if you go back and watch some of the morning coffees from about the full moon in August around the 17th onward, some of the messages are in there. I know I've talked about them on one or two of the Katonia live streams that I've done, but I thought it would be good to make a message video that puts together a kind of a summary of what Azrael has been saying to me since roughly the beginning of August, since around what they call the 8-8 portal. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is two reasons, really. One is that we are in an extremely intense astrological period where we are, this month is just absolutely full of aspects, omens, okay? Even outside of what we think of as traditional astrology. We've got eclipses, we've got comets, we've got potentially a supernova, and all these things visible in the sky, which is what's important to us on Earth. I mean, these things may go on in different places throughout the universe, but when they become visible to us and they become visible within the context of certain synchronicities, then that's when we have to it's telling us to pay attention to what's going on. There's also a second moon right now that's orbiting with, it's an asteroid that's basically in the moon's orbit. We've also got a lot of other aspects. We've got the sun and Mars in a very tense position. We've had Mars and Pluto in a very tense position. We have Chiron squaring off against Mars, squaring off against the sun. There's all of these things that make October a bit of a landmine kind of month. And Azrael has been giving me these morning messages where he's explained to me a little bit about what, explains in great detail, but he does talk about what these changes are and what's going on. Now, I should be clear before I get into these that we're not necessarily talking about specifics in the sense of, he's not, I mean, there has been some things that he has said about world events and what is going to go on, but we're not getting too specific into, say, I don't know, what's happening with the wars in the Ukraine and in the Middle East. We're not necessarily getting specific about what's going to happen with the election, although he does seem to imply a certain result to that. There's just some general things that he's talking about, and I'm going to mention those here, what's come through for me. I always say it with the caveat of, I'm the messenger, I'm the middleman. Though Azrael has told me many times, he is like, don't distance yourself from it. I'm telling you this, and I'm telling you the truth, and don't treat it like, well, he said it, I didn't, He doesn't want me to treat it that way. He's like, no, I'm telling you this, believe what I'm telling you. He's been very, very, I don't want to say forceful, but he's been very firm about that. So these are the messages that are coming through. So I'm going to start with the kinds of, the real kind of mind-blowing messages that came up in August. So I'm going to divide these up into, what he is saying about changes in the celestial realm. I'm just looking through the notes I have here about what I've written. What he says about Jesus and what he says about certain archangels, humans that were archangels, what his role is as what we call, quote unquote, the angel of death, and what he says about death, and what he says about this whole idea of ascension that we have been hearing about, and the kinds of things that have been going along with that. So, okay. So with that, I'm going to begin getting into the messages. So the first collection of messages that I can summarize, Azrael has mentioned that there is a shift coming in collective consciousness because there is an effort in the angelic realm to correct a hyper-masculine kind of imbalance that we've had. Now, we often refer to this hyper imbalance as a patriarchal kind of system, but it's connected to patriarchy is not just man-woman relationships or the status of women. When we talk about patriarchy, we're also talking about an ideals that are masculine with a capital M. When we talk about archetypes, we're not talking about, so if I talk about a masculine archetype, that doesn't mean I'm talking about men. If I say there's a feminine archetype, that doesn't mean I'm talking about women. These are concepts that we structure around ideas of masculine and feminine. So for example, with masculine, we're talking about rationality. We're talking about the intellect. We're talking about rules, law. We're talking about structure and form. We're talking about action. All of these things are very much connected in strength, force. All of these are elements that we see as connected with the masculine archetype, the way the masculine negotiates life, the way that the masculine would have us engage in life, or what the priorities would be. So therefore, in a masculine system, obviously, rational thinking is the default norm. And as is, using your intellect for things. When there's a problem, don't sit around, take action, right? There's a lot of this is the kind of energy that we have, and the kind of conventional wisdom we have is all based on what we think of as the masculine and archetypal sense. Now, the feminine, by contrast, has to do with the intuition, has to do with emotions. It has to do with receiving and being passive, waiting for the thing to happen rather than just jumping in with both feet. Okay, and really, it's not like which one do we choose over the other. This is not going, when we talk about balancing consciousness, we're not saying, feminine good, masculine bad, or vice versa. Although for a long time, it has been kind of that masculine good, feminine bad. Think about how we're told that your emotions are unreliable, that intuition is unreliable. Oh, it's woo-woo navel gazing, right? Don't pay it. Oh, that's just, you had a feeling about it. Whoopee, right? And again, it's understood that there are times when we can delude ourselves, and that's where we need our rationality to balance that out. But then there are times when we get ourselves absolutely stuck in a corner mentally because we're only focused on the rational. We're not able to see beyond that. We're not able to, it's like if I can't figure it out logically, then there's no answer, or it doesn't mean anything, or it's nothing, or it's a coincidence. The extreme of the masculine view is the whole idea that we're meat with eyes, right? That there's nothing to our lives. Our consciousness is an accident, and it's nothing. Interestingly, humanism does tend to privilege our consciousness as making us somehow better than other animals and so forth in the world. But it also can take on the metaphor of the machine, the idea that we are just machines. We are just functioning, and all of these things like emotions and stuff are just part of, how we acquire food and stuff. And that is a kind of extreme, also kind of an idea that's been more developed since the Industrial Revolution of kind of the 19th century, 18th to 19th century, and that very rationalistic way of thinking that has turned us to a mythology and a narrative that suggests that we are machines. Our medical system treats us like we're machines. Even psychology now treats us like we're machines. It's all about brain functioning and chemistry and things like that, which really they are the mechanism by which they're the vehicle for consciousness. They are the filtering system for consciousness, but they themselves aren't, in and of themselves, are not consciousness. Okay, so it's a matter of discovering the bigger picture here, discovering what's outside that, discovering what's in our support network. Where are we? So we've got this. There's an imbalance here because it's not that the masculine is bad. Okay, that's another thing that happens, is that we tend to, certainly nowadays, as women are starting to find their voice and not wanting to be second-class citizens, it's like masculine is bad. No, masculine men in society are as have as much trouble as women do, because the part of the reason that men don't engage in relationship the way women feel that they need them to is because men aren't trained to do that. Men have their own issues growing up, and own social pressures as men that make it difficult for them. Now, is it impossible for them? No, but it does make it difficult. And when these things are unconscious and kind of ingrained in the culture, even if intellectually a man can understand something, it doesn't always translate to action because, as I always say, the body hasn't learned it. So Azrael's talking about this kind of imbalance. But there's an imbalance not just in the earth realm, but in the celestial realm. Okay, now, his view of the universe, and I should stress that this was not the view I had coming in. This is a more Gnostic view of the universe. The Gnostics talk about the universe being created by pairings of what they call aeons, A-E-O-N. These are like angelic beings that male and female in nature, or sometimes with no gender or no sex, but they work together in these paired emanations, and what flows out of them is the universe. That's the harmony of the universe, are these paired emanations. Now, in Gnostic mythology, and Gnosticism, for those of you who don't know, was an early form of Christianity. It's a very philosophical form, very Neoplatonic, very much has a lot to do with, you can see a lot of the philosophy in the way that Gnosticism is couched, and there's some aspects of that I still feel are too hyper-masculine balanced, but the idea is that there is a kind of all-pervading energy that they call the plemora. Like they refer to it as the All-Father in Gnosticism. Azrael does not refer to this as the All-Father. He refers to it as the All-Mother. He equates it more with what the Hindus think of as parashakti. Okay, he says, no, it's an All-Mother. But that particular mystery, that particular creative force is not something that's manifest. So frequently we don't, unless that force is particularly called to be manifest, it's there, but it's not there. It's not in a form. It's not a god in some type of form sitting on a throne somewhere or something. This is just kind of what the aeons emanate from. Okay. Now, it says now, according to the Gnostic conception, this world, there is Sophia, who is what we think of as the divine or holy wisdom in the Bible. Sophia is, at some point, she's supposed to pair with her aeon. And aeons, he said, that it's like angels are kind of like, he says, in groupings that serve different functions. And some are creative and some are more about dissolution, which is part of the cycle. Part of the cycle, it's not just that you create, and everything just goes. You know, things come and then they kind of move out of being and then they move back in again. This is pretty much part of every system, and it's not just based on what we're experiencing here on Earth. There is this kind of cycle of, because as certain things go away, they're replaced with other things, or reborn as other things. Right? So, according to this particular vision of the world, this world was created by a demiurge. Okay, now a demiurge is when Sophia decides she's going to create something outside of the pairing by herself. And she creates a being that the Gnostics call Yaldabaoth. And Yaldabaoth is like the equivalent of Yahweh in the Bible for them. Okay, so the Gnostics are the ones who don't see Yahweh as a good God, but rather as a potentially an evil one. And in this view, Sophia appears as the serpent in the garden because she realizes she's made a mistake, to let Adam and Eve know, who are created by this demiurge. And the demiurge tells them his head is in a cloud, that's so he can't see that he thinks he's the only one. So he tells Adam and Eve that he's the creator and he's the only one. And she tries to come in the garden to say, no, this is not how it goes. You have a divine source. Together you create the thing. But then, of course, she gets banished from the garden. And in this conception of Christianity, Jesus Christ comes back as the serpent. Is the serpent returned to try to remind human beings of their inner divinity? Now, there's a whole history about this in religious studies, which I talk about in my book, and I also talk about when I teach the classes on this thing on Dionysus and on Mithraism and early Roman Empire. But we don't have time to get into that here. But but nonetheless, that's just the basic conception, understanding that there's not just one vanilla flavor of Gnosticism. There's a lot of different variations on that, but that's kind of the basic thread that kind of runs through it. And what Azrael is saying to me, he says, is yes, that's actually true. This world has been ruled by a being that has been, not necessarily that he always thinks he's the only one, he's aware of the others, but he thinks he's the only one that's important, and he has a very lopsided way of looking at how life should be. Now, Azrael has told me that when this particular being became kind of like within the angelic realm, had some kind of an authoritative role. Let's just put it that way. I'm not sure I fully understand hierarchies there and how they work. He says that there are different types of angels and there's different hierarchies, but he said it's not like, I answer, one answers to you and one answers. He says everybody he says more like it's like a working together. That's what it's supposed to be. It's not that, the seraphim are higher than the archangels, so the archangels have to bow to the seraphim. It doesn't work like that. He said everybody, it's kind of people just work, they work together, I'm saying people, angels work together and they know what their roles are. Okay, and that's what he's saying. So what happens then is that when this demiurge, we'll just call him, I don't know, he's not necessarily saying, we know him as Yaldabaoth, potentially as I feel like I'm going to offend a lot of people if I refer to him as Yahweh, but it's certainly this idea of this masculine creative principle that is the only one. Now, this particular being brought two humans into the realm of angels, okay? And that is what we think of, it was Enoch and it was Elijah. And they were brought in as Archangel Metatron and Archangel Sandalphon, okay? Now, Jesus himself also is sort of has this human component that is also as part of this realm. So again, this particular demiurge did have a certain amount of authority, or at least a certain amount of influence. And you have to remember, what we think of as the plemora is not something manifest. So it's not like the plemora steps in. The plemora has to be invoked. It would have to step in and mediate. It's like, she doesn't, if you refer to her as she, it does not really have an awareness until she takes on a kind of form. Okay. And so now Enoch, he talks about the book of Enoch. A lot of people talk about the book of Enoch with angels, right? He says Enoch is, he basically calls Enoch a lie. He says there are no such thing as fallen angels. I mean, are there demonic beings in the earth? Yes. I mean, they're elemental type beings. And like a lot of these kinds of beings, some of them are beneficial to you and some are not. Many of them, they're tricky in the way that they behave. So you have to be careful. If you think that your intellect is better than them or can defeat them, you could find yourself in trouble. But this is just a type of being. They're all intermediary kinds of beings. So this cosmic battle between like God and the devil, he says, no, that's not really how it works. He says the problem is, there's this narrative that's been created. And Metatron, who is often, at least one of his roles, he's sometimes described as the scribe of the gods. Metatron is also supposed to be the keeper of the sacred geometry. And this was a role that he had assumed, but it's not always clear. There's different archangels who are sometimes couched as having the scribe role. But Metatron, he's not the keeper of the Akashic, okay? People who know about Akashic records. He's not the keeper of soul records. What Azrael said was, he said, no, Metatron was more of the keeping, he was writing the narrative of this world as dictated by the demiurge, okay? And what's weird is somebody told me that in the TV show Supernatural, there's kind of a very similar idea. And I've never seen that TV show, just so you know. But I've had a couple people tell me about it. I know I have some friends who were super fans of that show. And they said, yeah, I mean, whether they explicitly stated as Metatron or whatever, but there is that kind of idea that there's an angel that, God has stepped out of the way. And there's this angel who's kind of made up the whole narrative of what's going on. And So whatever this narrative is, for whatever reason, Azrael has said it's been a narrative that's been allowed to stand for 1,000 years. And that time is now up. Now, Azrael is very resentful of this narrative, because in this narrative, this is where we have the split. This is where the feminine becomes subject to the masculine. This is where death has a role as almost an evil, something to be shunned. Okay, like it's a punishment of some kind rather than part of a cycle. So beings like Azrael and Samael have really gotten the short end of the stick, so to speak. These particular angels have treated them like they are basically telling humans that they are to be shunned, that they represent an evil, or bringers of plague, or whatever, that they're something almost akin to the devil in the way that they are. And at least now, even though if you read about either of these archangels, Samael is sometimes explicitly identified with the devil. Azrael, maybe not so much, but Azrael still has been used in terms of the idea of something that ends up being connected to some kind of wickedness. But he said, no, it's not that. He says, we are angels of dissolution. And that's just their job. That's their role. So in this new system, everything is in its proper place. Okay, the feminine is in its proper place. The place of death is understood. But right now, and again, this seems to jive a lot with what's happening with Pluto and Capricorn. Pluto now going direct and moving into Aquarius. There's probably some connection to this as being the end of an era where this is the narrative, the global narrative. Because it is something, while you don't necessarily see this way of thinking everywhere in the world, to some degree it's touched on everything in the world. Okay, we have this idea of what free societies should look like, what the world should look like, and so forth. But a lot of times we are still looking at something, even in free societies, that are very, very masculine dominated, and that are dominated by narratives of fear. Okay, so let me just read to you what I have here in my notes. So it says that, so we talk about Sophia trying to correct her mistake and rebalance the world. Yaldabaoth punished his creation and then left them living in fear and shame. Death is treated as a punishment. Initially, Yaldabaoth had great authority among the angels and could command them to do things in this world. Yaldabaoth's narrative was not upheld by the angels, and he got his revenge by spreading lies through his prophets. Enoch in particular claimed that he was king of the heavens and cast angels down to hell after they mated with human women and produced the Nephilim, which he also said did not happen. Because Azrael says this is a lie. Angels cannot mate with humans. Angels do not have the same kind of free will that humans have by nature, and they are there for a specific creative or destructive purpose. They are evil spirits, but they are not fallen angels. Enoch was raised into the celestial realm as an angel, becoming Archangel Metatron, and viewed as the highest angel connected to the sacred geometry. Metatron was scribe of Yaldabaoth, writing the story of this world and complicit in continuing the lie. The effects were not felt only on Earth. The trouble was part of the celestial realm as well. Feminine angels were subjugated, and their privileges removed. Some of the female angels fought back, notably some very fiery seraphim, but both Yaldabaoth and Metatron feared her, and a kind of prison or asylum was created for these particular angels. And so these female angels were kind of ended up being put in positions where they became, maybe to a certain degree, even complicit in this, just out of fear and shame and that kind of a thing. Okay, and he said it happened about 1,000 years ago. He does say that Elamaya escaped and was born on Earth, but initially spent part of her time upholding the medieval church, but slowly over time has regained power. And so this is part of the current shift. Okay, so it says Metatron and Yaldabaoth were taken to task about 400 years after the initial overthrow, but never admitted their guilt, show any repentance, or made any change to the narrative of the world. Regardless of what happened in the angelic realm, they still held strong power on the earth. And this episode divided the angels. While almost all agreed that this imbalanced world was problematic, Some wanted to believe it was a good thing, something that where the positive came out of the negative. It says the All-Mother did not get involved until she was called into the dispute, as she is unmanifest and must take on a form to interact with any beings. However, time has shown that this imbalance cannot be sustained, and of course, as he said, it's also run its course. That 1,000-year period has come to an end. The balance between masculine and feminine has to be restored. He said around the full moon of August 2024, there was a reckoning, and Metatron and those who supported him, he does talk about the 9, but he seems like he talks about 4 angels. So I'm hearing roughly 4 to 9 angels were exiled. Okay, they joined other angels who roam the earth, and some of those are just working their mission and not in exile. He also says that there are very few angelic souls on earth. Okay, that those who have an angelic origin, he said maybe there's less than 10, is what he says. Okay, now as a result of this, anybody who channels Metatron and supporting angels may be getting messages of doom, maybe getting messages of censorship, maybe claiming that we are headed for major disaster. And it says, these are lies, is what Azrael says. Don't listen to them. The world is actually headed for a stage of global harmony and peace. The newly exiled angels are spreading misinformation, but this will be corrected. And that kind of moves us up to where we are now, where he says this is the beginning of the end of that terror. That's literally the message I got this morning. Okay, so let me go on and let me talk about some other subjects that he has mentioned. This is the main story that he's telling me. And it's interesting because I am seeing a whole lot both with astrology, in particular with astrology, but even with what I'm hearing from other mediums and other people who channel angels, that they're getting a very similar message about the role of the feminine coming up. So. Now, on the subject of Jesus and Archangel Sandalphon, because you might wonder where they fit in with this, because certainly the main religion that seems to spread this message is Christianity. But what Azrael said is, he says, there's nothing wrong with Jesus Christ. He says, Jesus Christ is there, he has his message, and he is in this divine realm. He's certainly treated like a master, or I'm not sure if he's actually considered to be one of the angels, but he is... he has this kind of status, and he said actually he did come to bring a good message to the world, but that message was co-opted by he as a figure was co-opted and made into the poster boy for this script, is what he said. So he's saying, yes, Jesus is probably just as distressed about this narrative as many of the other angels are. Now, Sandalphon is an archangel, because you might think, oh, okay, if Sandalphon was also a human brought to this realm, there does not seem to be any issue with Archangel Sandalphon. He seems to be a connector to the Earth realm, and seems to be doing no issue with his role, his work, or anything else. The only one Azrael has an issue with here is Metatron. So, now I know I've had conversations with people who have channeled Metatron and have said to me, this is not how I understand Metatron and so forth. But you have to recognize that it's not that Metatron necessarily was a being that was always going to steer people wrong or towards the wrong thing. He was in charge of certain things. But what Azrael does not like about him is that he was complicit in writing this narrative, feeling like, well, even if he personally did not agree with it to some degree, he kind of went along with it and promulgated it. So that is where this discontent comes in. But now this is, there is this rebalancing, and now that some of these feminine energies that have been on Earth have returned, then now there is this ability to he said it was almost like around that full moon there was a renegotiation, and maybe a talking about what the effects were of this change on the Earth. And he said some people were swayed. There's still that 4 that are not swayed, and those are actually, he said, are in exile at this point. So again, not something I can visually attest to, but this is what I've been told. Okay, now The next piece that I want to talk about is Azrael as the angel of death, because that's frequently how he is referred to. I refer to him as that on my website. And incidentally, I'm going to have the transcript of this posted in the next few days to my website. So, you'll be able to read that there if you would like to read this rather than just rely on what I say here. He said, it's not quite accurate. He says, it's not quite accurate to call him the angel of death. He said, Samael is actually the angel of death. He says, but there is overlap in their duties. Azrael helps souls go through transformation from the body and becoming aware of the magnitude of their soul and the visuals there. If we want to look at, how does he put it here? And when he asked, he does visit poisons when commanded by the source. And he always refers to her as she who creates the boundaries. Okay. So if we want to look at it, for example, a biblical event, assuming that this actually happened, if there was the death of the firstborns in Egypt, and Azrael would have been the angel who would have been sent to bring the disease during Passover. He would have been asked to do that. And he says, the way that I was able to compare his role, if we can use tarot as a correspondence, he's not so much the energy of the death card and more the energy of the tower and maybe even the star combined. Okay. He said breaking down of old structures. That's what Azrael does. And he does it through different means. Certainly we can look at mythology through the years and see that when plague comes through and is brought, that bringing plague is often a wake-up call for people to make change. Okay, so we can think about Azrael in that way too, as the one who wakes us up to make a change. And sometimes when people are very deeply unaware or just don't want to look at something, it can be a kind of change that feels like a major shakeup or like maybe something cataclysmic about it. But it's really just to wake us up to what it is that we need to know. And that's why he's so involved right now. But it's all meant to maintain the cycles of life or to correct them. So what happens when we die, according to Azrael? A lot of times we think of death as getting our wings, and to a certain degree, there's some history in terms of the soul as being like a winged creature or a bird-like creature. But he says we don't become angels when we die. He said ancestral spirits can take on protective roles, but this is only for a period of time. So if you pass away and you feel like, my grandma is still with me or something like that, he says, yes, that can happen for a period of time, but at some point, everybody moves on. He says the soul has, he mentions two parts of the soul, one that goes to the place of ancestors, and the other is a kind of quantum soul that exists across many timelines and dimensions. When we die, the husk of our body decays. The personality we had goes to this ancestral realm. So that's the memory of us that's kept, and that might be what appears, or it may be imprinted on a particular environment depending on what goes on with it. The essential part of our soul, what the Greeks call the psyche, shifts into awareness of another timeline and another life. This goes on until that soul no longer engages in the game of identities and becomes part of universal consciousness. So this is what he tells me about death and about what happens after that. Now, let's get into the idea of ascension, because that is something that's coming up a lot lately. I can tell you a friend and I went to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery recently, actually, in New York. And we like to visit it around Halloween time. And generally, it's always had kind of a feeling or a vibe to it. But she said to me, she says, doesn't it feel like nobody's here? And we have talked about that a lot recently, going into graveyards, maybe graveyards that had kind of a numinous sense that somebody was there or something was there. And it just seems like it's empty. And the message I got was, yeah, there's an ascension that's going on. There's, certain souls, they're not around anymore. They're moving past. They're not playing the game, or they're not part of that. There's kind of this almost like a refresh that's going on. And as he explained it to me here, I said, periodically lingering energies of the past are released and the energy becomes new again on the earth. Like I said, noticing this absence of spirits in graveyards or other ancestral places, these energies are now released, and the entire world has undergone a major timeline shift as a result of upgrading energies. I tend to view these personally as less of an ascension and more as an expansion and renewal. Okay, we're expanding our awareness. And a lot of people feel this in the body too. You feel this in the nervous system, people who experience terrible headaches and body pains and swelling of the lymph nodes or pain in the back of the head. These are all things that represent the way in which our body is trying to respond to the way it's being opened up to negotiate new things. Azrael has also told me that this is a time when many souls, he says he has been asked to visit by request, is kind of what he's said, because there are many souls who are dying to be released. And more than likely this is because, especially if you're talking about much older people, the physical adaptation of the body is more than they can stand, and they would rather just be released rather than do that. So there could be this kind of exodus of souls, so to speak, that may be happening. So we're opening up to that broader perspective, opening up to the feminine consciousness, which is why there's been a big push towards developing our intuition, towards paying attention to those other tools we have besides rationality. I mean, rationality has a place, but it's not the only tool that we have. And how do we bring in and use these other tools that we have in order to experience life? It's also getting waved the idea that life is supposed to be nothing but hard labor, which is something else that comes out of that same mythology of, a corrupt world that says, you will be forced to labor hard upon the earth. And he's saying, no, there's other ways to do things. And I think our challenge in the age of Aquarius is going to be, how are we going to take Aquarian things like futuristic technology and so forth and not use them to replace our humanity, but rather use them to help us finally live a life free of drudgery, to be able to do certain things for us so that we can get on with the business of living, and as he says, the business of play. He's one of those who said, life's an adventure. It's a wonderful opportunity to experience this place. And most people never experience it because they're so worried about all of these other things and they're so stuck in their head that they're not actually living here. And that is certainly a message that I've given even before I've met Azrael. So the general message is, live your life and enjoy it. Act in accordance with your heart and your soul. Do not live a life of shame and guilt. Earth is a powerful energy in her own right, and we should love her and enjoy everything she has to offer us. So there's definitely a push towards the feminine here, and there's definitely a push towards making use of a technological future to help us enjoy the life that we have now, not as a means of replacing us or of developing machine overlords and things like that. This is more about the way in which those technologies can assist us and make us not have to focus on some of this day-to-day stuff and focus more on, so we can actually turn more to ourselves and reconnect to ourselves. Because the masculine and feminine, it's not all just about how people of different genders get on together or people of different races and nationalities, but also how we get along with ourselves. Okay, so that's part of this as well. So that's the information in a nutshell that I have gotten from Azrael. I do get various messages about things that are changing and certain shifts. It seems like mid-month here, there's going to be, and maybe by the time this video is released, we might even be past that date a little bit, but it does seem like there's going to be some other changes, bits of information coming in, awakenings. We just need to, people who are feeling in doubt about the change, I feel like right now, the energies are just so intense and we're still like in the middle. We're in the beginning of the end, as he said this morning. He said, you're in the beginning of the end, in the Enochian language, and which he calls Abagaku. He does not call it Enochian, the simple reason that he's not a fan of Enoch. There's this switch over that's happening here, and we're still in the midst of it, in this beginning of the end. So I think he's just saying, hang tight. The focus that for the future is going to be on how we connect with others, not how we divide ourselves. Anybody who tries to bring fear and division is not going to succeed. So, so anyway, that's the messages that I have. I was just trying to give some kind of an executive summary for people, something that people can, look to, or to help them understand what Azrael's trying to say. And I probably will do some more channeling in the near future, and I will post those. But I thought an update message would be a good thing right now with everything going on. Hope this has not been too verbose, and I'm going to try to do some minor editing and put it up as quickly as possible, along with this transcript on my transitionlifecoaching.net website on the page labeled Archangel Azrael. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next tarot video, morning coffee, or Azrael channeling. Take care.